And so the animal rights team, of which I'm one, has taken it upon ourselves to investigate this issue. What could go wrong?
Did everybody get me, robot, or just Roger?
No, I got you as well.
I didn't.
Robot.
What if I just kind of do this as I'm...
You're a Dalek.
Exterminate.
Well, the definition of veganism is a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose.
We were kind of looking to do this recording about the definition because it's something that comes up all the time. And so we started looking at definition. And Jeremy, you said, well, that's the definition. And I goes, no, you've got to scroll down, right?
I'm guilty of making this error myself. I'll confess. Yeah, it's easy to do. I think in our generation, we're very, click and we want quick answers. Even long comments, people might not finish. So it's let alone, if you go to the Vegan Society's website, you see definition of veganism at the top, you see it on the sidebar, and then you see in big text, and depending on the monitor and everything, that's pretty much all you see. So it's natural to assume that is the definition, but it's not until you scroll down, you realize the full definition has a different opening and a different second part. It opens with a philosophy and way of living, and has a whole part after that, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment. In dietary terms, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. So that's quite a bit more than the subset.
I mean, we've already put a post on social media, and we get in a lot of comments like, oh, this is new to me. Now, that's kind of like shocking, really, in the sense that people base an entire argument on the definition, and we don't seem to be even talking about the definition. And even a weirder thing, which is sometimes the Vegan Society seem to quote themselves differently. For example, there's two pages. One is the definition page on the Vegan Society thing. And there's one called, what is it, Key Facts?
Key facts, yeah.
And
that's basically using the heading.
Yeah, so that one gives the short edit as the definition. Whereas they're saying in the definition page, that's not the definition. So it's really confused.
Well, I think to me, the key thing is there's two main ways this definition is used. It's for new vegans who are curious what the definition of veganism is when they're first interacting with it. It might be their first touch point really with veganism. And then it's addressing movement issues and discussing things from within. People often cite the definition and say, whoa, that's not what veganism is. This is the definition. So it's really frames a lot of important conversations.
I think to the latter point that you made as well, I guess it's rather convenient if I'm not going to name vegans, but if a particular vegan has a somewhat of a narrower viewpoint on veganism, they'll use that definition to kind of double down and just repeat what they've said as a way of disagreeing or trying to refute the broader aspects of veganism, which isn't really, unfortunately, which isn't included in that definition. The likes of reference to respect for humans, respect for the environment, and these broader aspects, which will form a part of it.
Yeah, and I think another touch point that people often look at is just doing a Google search. They might not even go to a website. And one that came up for me, and I know Google search results are dependent on the region and other things. However, it says veganism is the practice of abstaining from the use of animal products, particularly in diet, and an associated philosophy that rejects the commodity status of animals. An individual who follows the diet of veganism is known as a vegan.
Well, at least it mentions philosophy.
And it mentions use, and it also makes reference to the fact of inherent rights of other animals not to be viewed as property, which I quite liked that part of it actually, because it does bring that commodity aspect into it. So
I mean, that's better than the Vegan Society one, isn't
it? In some ways.
Yeah.
The interesting thing here is it says diet or philosophy. So technically someone could just follow the diet.
Yes, I didn't like
so
that.
I think what they mean to say there's and. I'm not sure where that's pulling from, but...
Yeah, I think it would be better to say an individual who follows the philosophy, including the diet, would be more my take on that.
True, putting the philosophy first and having the diet as a run-on, because it is the focus, but it's not the whole.
Yeah.
Well, the diet flows from the philosophy, obviously, and that's what Leslie Cross said right the way back to the 1950s. He said veganism was a principle, and you can apply it to the diet, or you could apply it to animal use, and then you can apply it to ideas like liberation, and that's where the human bit comes in.
Does the actual framing it as far as possible and practicable, is that kind of problematic in a way that that's always going to be subjective to every single individual's interpretation? And does it lead us down the road of being as vegan as possible? Almost like going into that, well, you know, it's okay to, if sometimes there's egg in something or a little bit of cheese here and there, I'm still being as vegan as practically possible on that day in that situation. Does it take us down that, does it leave it open, in other words, to interpretation for every individual?
I think it sort of, it hints that it's more like something that's virtuous, like a virtuous ethic, rather than something that's like about justice.
I agree. I think to me, and this is something that a big internal movement discussion, isn't it? Is it, you know, to what point we should positively praise steps in the direction towards veganism versus setting the clear end goal of veganism? And to me, there's a sweet spot in the middle. And I think as far as writing a definition, we should make it as clear as possible. And then if people choose, you know, these extreme situations, you know, that's up to them as an individual to choose. But I think when we're already setting the bar a bit lower in the definition in a way, it'll be interesting to see how we handle that in our own definitions, I guess. But I agree that leaves some more subjectivity to it that, you know, may confuse things.
It's not really possible to live in a kind of capitalist world where there's a lot of harms which are structural in nature. It's not possible to deal with that as an individual consumer, as it were. It's not possible. And so, you know, there were times when people thought, well, the only way we can do it is to say have a vegan commune. That would be a way of doing it. But even then, you still got to pay the bills and electricity and everything else.
It's similar to the whole thing about veganism being a choice, whereas I think I've started to move more towards it being essential, not like, oh, we can do this, it doesn't really matter, like really having a strong claim that this is an essential moral question. So you're doing street outreach and you're saying, well, we're here to stop the exploitation of other animals. What would you, and they say exploitation, what do you mean? How would you respond?
Well, I wouldn't, but you see, I wouldn't use that word. I'd probably just be talking about use straight off. So,
which makes the question, should we say exploitation in the definition?
Yeah, well, I mean, the one that I've gone for is exploitation and oppression. You know, the use thing kind of then invites the use stroke abuse debate that goes on in the movement too. And, you know, a lot of people, and there are quite a few kind of activist groups who would really make the case that abuse is a better term than use. Whereas I think that we would probably see it the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And also that they're not handled in isolation. To me, use is for establishing the scope, and then I focus on rights violations and specifically what those rights violations are. I would never just say animal use on its own.
In that definition that you cited though, Jeremy, what came up for me is just the fact that it seems that it's hinting at, you know, using another being for another one's as a means to an end. That's essentially what I take away from that. So I guess I would agree with Roger that I feel it does the job, but I do understand that where you're coming from as well with using the word use as.
The second meaning if you look at the dictionary definition, says that first one is what you said, Jeremy, the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. The second one, the action of making use of and benefiting from resources. The fact of making use of a situation to gain unfair advantage for oneself. So I guess they all hint at the same kind of thing. I think for me, what it refers to, or what I kind of maybe take from it, is using someone without their consent. That would be, and if there was a different word for that, that would be it, I suppose. Making use.
Well, in relation to this definition, it's using someone exploitatively.
Except for exploitation can often have consent involved in a human sense, can it?
Well, even
when you
if that's
think of like exploited workers, you know, you could argue class issues and the rest. There's a lot that goes into it. However, they are consenting to do that work. Other animals aren't consenting to.
Yeah, but we'd just immediately make the point that other animals are not consenting, so therefore that doesn't apply in that case.
Maybe our newly crafted definition could incorporate that. I don't know. And
the other thing,
Wendy's point, because I'm familiar with that one as well. Do we want to refer to other animals as resources? Because that takes us back to a similar discussion around products. To me, when I hear exploit, I think about exploiting workers. and animal use is to me is not a one-to-one relationship, because they shouldn't be, you know, working for us at all. So it's not a matter of removing the exploitation, it's a matter of removing the use. This could probably be a whole nother episode though, couldn't it?
I prefer use. I prefer use to exploitation. The thing is, use does not describe everything. I believe that there is abuse without use. I don't like the word abuse. I think it's welfarist and leads people's minds to welfarist thinking. But I prefer oppression, for example. Oppression was mentioned by Roger because it's a wider thing. I think we should include things that happen to other animals that are not used. For example, poisoning stray cats and dogs, something that unfortunately here happens every other day. It is a violation of rights, but it's not used, at least as I understand it.
I guess when you say like the word oppression, I mean, what comes up for me is sort of taking away dignity as well. So that's a form of, I guess, you know, denying freedom, taking away dignity. Yeah, hints of that for me.
With that, since that's in your definition, Roger, do you want to have a read of your definition?
So I've got veganism, colon. I'm the only one who used the colon, folks.
You can tell who the academic is.
Yeah. That's a brownie point there.
There's no period there, Roger.
So I've got the active opposition to the exploitation and oppression of all sentient beings. And the reason it's short and pithy is the fact that I think the best type of definitions are, because I think a definition is the starting point of a conversation. It's not the be end and end all of it. And that's the problem with the discourse about the definition in the movement, is people tend to just focus on it. Ironically, an edited version of it, but they focus on that as though that incorporates everything. I mean, there's so much irony in that, in the sense that they're going, well, look, you know, it doesn't mention humans in this, does it? Well, you're not even using the definition.
It's interesting because you chose to say the active opposition. Was there any specific reasoning behind that? As opposed, was that to shift away from the individual contribution and actually take it a step further and say that actually opposing it? Yeah,
it's a good point. And it's something that I think I could be challenged on in a sense. I suppose I've got Ronnie Lee in mind there, in the sense that his recent definition, I think, which is now called the vegan flag definition, I think, that was this idea that, you know, you kind of have to be an activist, which I kind of don't agree with, but in a nuanced way, in the sense that I think just being vegan is being an activist. But, you know, that's not the way that it's kind of characterized. It's kind of, you know, you need to be an activist over and above. And of course, then you've got the pejorative of cupcake vegans and, you know, the kind of passive, the kind of silent vegans. Although I must admit, I don't think I've ever met a silent vegan personally, and it even goes against the famous joke, doesn't it, about you know when there's a vegan in the room.
Yeah.
How do we know?
Yeah, that's
they'll tell you. Yeah, that's right.
You know, there's a non-vegan pointing it out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's another irony, because that's often the case, that the vegan doesn't say anything, and then somebody kind of announces it as though they're some kind of MC of the room, and then you get criticized for being arrogant or something, and you haven't said a damn word.
With your definition, if instead of and oppression, we just said and the opposition of exerting one's power over, you know, and then how are you want to say all sentient beings or whatever.
People will then question what that means, though, wouldn't they? I mean, exploitation and use, sort of exploitation and oppression. But I mean, I think we're just playing with words almost there, because you could slot in a few ones just to make sure you're covered, if you like, you know, exploitation, use, and oppression, maybe. You know, I don't know whether that would get anywhere, but I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that, actually. Exploitation.
I just think, I mean, we're always going to get people to challenge it, but the more we can just make this bulletproof, you know, why not? That's kind of where I'm coming from. I obviously agree all animal use is oppression. You know, I agree with the fundamentals. I'm just trying to look at the almost play devil's advocate.
I think there is some kind of ripening up to be done, isn't there, with explaining these concepts to non-vegans who are going to be by their nature speciesist and going to probably have attach more human-centric definitions to those words. I guess that's what comes. Yeah.
But doesn't that go back to my point that the definition is the starting point, and then people go, well, what exactly does that mean? And then you tell them.
I'd push back a little bit on that and say the more we can tell them in the definition, it's going to speed things along versus leaving things open to interpretation. Yeah,
it's a balance, obviously, you know, because you could just endlessly redefine and clarify and be very careful and precise with language, but then you'd end up with a one-page definition if you're not careful, because you know the real skill of it is to kind of slim it down. Really, you know, this thing in academia, people say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to make it shorter," and because that's the skill of writing. Whether that really applies to a definition or not, I don't know, because there could be a couple of phrases or words that we could throw in there and improve it.
If we go back to the Vegan Society definition, though, if we're actually critiquing the fact that people are taking the shorter definition and applying it in a way that suits their purpose, rather than looking at the longer, more elaborated and descriptive definition, because that gives you more of the scope. So isn't that really contradictory in a way? Does that make sense? It's like, if we reduce it too much, then we're giving people a very limited definition and saying, okay, take that and do what you will with it, rather than going, actually, let's just frame it a little bit better for you to have a deeper understanding of what we mean.
No, because that then just depends on the words used then. I mean, I would say that everything that we've come up with for this recording is superior to the Vegan Society one, whether we talk about the long one or the short one. Because I regard, you see, the point is, another thing that gets missed in this conversation is we're talking about the definition that comes from 1979 through to 1988. It's not made up by Donald Watson, because he didn't do that. It wasn't 1944. This is 1979 through to 1988. And the interesting movement thing there is this was when the Vegan Society were firming up and becoming more professional. So they wanted a memorandum, articles of association, this kind of stuff. And this was part of the redefinition that fitted all that. And the weird thing about that is that, I mean, I was in the movement at that time, but we didn't notice that they changed the definition, because we didn't in those days even include veganism as part of the animal rights cause. It was, I mean, it's a bizarre thing to have to explain in the 21st century. So we didn't notice it. I mean, like, if they'd have tried to have changed it from anything, say, for example, the definition was anything that we're going to come up with, and then they try to change it to what we've got now, people now will be going, hang on a second, you're making it wishy-washy, you're making it weaker, you know, you're bringing in welfare language and all that. None of that was even talked about in those days, because we didn't take any notice of the Vegan Society then.
To Wendy's point, though, isn't the heading effectively slimming it down? So isn't what we've observed, this phenomenon happening with the heading becoming the definition and creating this ambiguity around whether humans are part of it? Isn't that a business case to have a longer, more thorough, robust framing?
Yeah, but I mean, the point is, you can do that in short order anyway, because I mean they don't do in the Vegan Society definition that we're working with, whether it's the long one or the short one, it's not really very good compared with what we're coming forward with today. I mean,
not that we're biased or anything.
No, I mean, I think it's an arguable truism in the movement that the Vegan Society definition of veganism is not very good.
Well, to your point, so you said this current one is 79. Is that the date that, I appreciate you gave a date range, but it was originally created in 79, was it?
Yeah, it's actually in the history. It says that. It says this is the December 1979 thing. By winter 1988, this definition was, and it's been tinkered about with a little bit, but that's generally speaking the one that's been since then. So that's the one that people come into the movement and get to know. It's not the best one in terms of the history of the definitions, or even just statements about veganism from people like Eva Batten and Donald Watson. They weren't necessarily trying to define veganism, but they still came up with things which would be a better definition than the Vegan Society one.
Back to your definition, one last question for you. You chose to say all sentient beings. I guess what was the idea behind saying that versus all animals, for instance?
Because it avoids the argument that we get from a lot of vegans that, well, I mean, some vegans actually say, you know, humans are not animals. And so, or if they don't want to say that, they'll still argue that those terms are separate. So human and animal. We know a lot of vegans who will just say humans and animals. They won't say other animals or non-human animals or other than human animals or animals other than human. I mean, they don't say all of those alternatives. They just say animals, and they just think that everybody knows that they mean other animals, and they are separate from human animals. But I mean, it's like there's like we've created our own species barrier. We've got human animals on one side of it, and all the other animals on the other.
Everyone else on the other side, yeah.
To me, it hits at a wider ethic of obviously being inclusive. The fact that it's inclusive includes human animals, and also to me that we need to be more mindful of how we support certain companies and our support for other things.
The reason I ask is I just wonder the word sentient, if one, your average non-vegan is really internalized what that means, and two, does that start a discussion around line drawing? Because to me that's we should probably hold the philosophy and breaking down a Reagan's theory for another call, but to me I think that's a mistake. I think we don't necessarily need to acknowledge the degree to someone is intelligent, the degree to which they feel pain. We just need to establish that they do. And to me, sentience, all of a sudden you get to like, okay, so which species are sentient, and who isn't? So I think we're maybe talking about two different things, but as far as the line drawing thing, that's where I think all animals could be stronger. And then you could tack on the end, all animals and humans, if you wanted to be explicit, as well as humans.
No, you don't put including humans, would you? Not
including humans. Yeah, that's what I mean to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could do that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's Donald Watson back in 1945 who used the phrase. He was having a talk with somebody called R.P. Adcock, and this guy was arguing with him. And this is in the Vegan News before it became the Vegan. And August 45, he was saying, well, look, cows are much more distant from bees than bees are to crops. And so, in other words, vegans shouldn't really care about honey unless they cared about the exploitation of cereals, crops, and fruit, he was saying. And so Watson replied by saying, well, the Vegan Society is about opposing the exploitation of sentient life. When the Vegan Society was born in the States in the 1960s, they used the idea of reverence for life, which obviously gets them into, well, what about plants then? Problem. Which the British Vegan Society never had that problem because they never used that phrase.
And I think that articulates the whole discussion here, isn't it? The way we frame our points, and i.e. the definition, is essential. You know, everything flows from that. I think there's a few other definitions. Wendy or Nella, do you want to have a go at one of yours?
May I add something about Roger's definition? I like the active opposition part very much because I'm thinking that many people may oppose something theoretically, but not align their way of living with their beliefs. So I think the active part is very spot on.